thank you all for joining us for today's QuickBooks how-to session. The session is brought to you by Hawkins CPAs. Hawkins CPAs is a Forbes recommended and inside public accounting 200 firm. The firm provides certified public accounting services to privately held businesses, governmental organizations, nonprofit entities, housing authorities, and credit unions. The firm currently has offices in Green Bay, La Crosse, Manitowoc, Marshfield, Medford, Mequon in Wisconsin, and Rochester, St. Charles, and Winona in Minnesota. The firm was founded in 1956 and has nearly 180 employees today. Learn more about Hawkins CPAs on our website at hawkins-cpas.com. Today, this how-to event will focus on customizing your QuickBooks desktop preferences. We will be answering some of your questions that you submitted in registration. If you have additional questions during Debbie's presentation, please utilize the chat box feature in Zoom. I will be monitoring that, and we will be addressing your questions and maybe comments along the way or at the end of the presentation. To ensure a quality broadcast for everyone, please be sure your microphone is on mute. And if you wanted to mute your video as well, that would help. Now, I have the pleasure of introducing Debbie Denny. Debbie is an accounting services manager in our Green Bay location. She is an advanced certified QuickBooks Desktop ProAdvisor and a certified QuickBooks Online ProAdvisor. Debbie specializes in software consulting and training, small business accounting, and tax preparation.
Join the meeting.
For Debbie, helping her clients is like helping family. She loves getting to know them, their needs, and many times their spouses, kids, and pets. So with that, I would like to welcome Debbie, and she has her screen shared. So take it away, Debbie.
Thanks, Corey. As Corey said, I'm Debbie Denny. I've been with the firm for about 12 or 13 years, and I was with a different accounting firm prior to this. So my main area of specialty is small business. And I've been working with QuickBooks for 20 some years. It's an amazing program. I love it. And today I'm going to show you a little bit about the preferences. We do have some other roundtables that we've done in the past that are out on our website. So if you're interested in those topics, please go ahead and view the presentations. And with that, we will get started on our preferences. So I am going to take myself off here. And let's see here. Then we will go into QuickBooks. I believe you should be able to see my screen yet. And if you can't, I'm sure Corey will be running down the road. So in QuickBooks, to get into the preferences section, all you need to do is click on Edit on the top menu bar, and then Preferences. And our preferences start with all these different options. And let's see, I'm going to move that over. So these are all the different preferences that you get to customize throughout QuickBooks. And you can see there's lots of them. There are two tabs in each preference. One is My Preferences, and the other is Company Preferences. If you are in a multi-user environment, the My Preferences is for your computer and your QuickBooks separate from everybody else's. So one person can have different preferences than the other. The company preferences, these are things that are set by the administrator. So whatever the company preferences are, that is what everybody will have. So these are kind of the main things. And these are things that as a user, not the admin user, but as a general user, you cannot change. Only the admin can change those preferences. So we're going to go along and look at the preferences in each one of these areas. And I'll kind of explain some of the ones that kind of how they act. In the accounting preference, under My Preferences is autofill the memo in the general journal entry. So if you're making a general journal entry, what it'll do is the first line where you have the memo, it'll fill that down into all the other lines of that journal entry. And the company preferences, again, these are the admin only can set these. Here's where you would turn on your account numbers. You can tell QuickBooks to require the accounts, which is a good idea, and show the lowest sub-account only. So if you have sub-accounts in your chart of accounts, what it'll do is just show the latest account or the smallest down the line. What I'm going to do quickly now is I'm just going to open another company file and see. And then I can kind of show you as we're going along. So I'm opening that on my other screen. So hang on a sec. Go back into our preferences. Okay. Sorry about that. I should have had that up already. Okay, so we'll go back into our preferences. And again, under accounting, company preferences, the show lowest sub-account only. So in your chart of accounts, if you have that one checked, oh, hang on. Oh, it's not going to let me bring that over. Thought I could share that on my other screen, but I can't. Sorry about that. Do this. In your chart of accounts, if you have sub-accounts, like payroll liabilities, it will show only the sub-accounts. It will not show you your payroll liabilities. So that's what that preference does. So assign classes. What classes will do in QuickBooks is it will track your income expenses, things like that by class. And your classes are, they could be departments, they could be locations, they could be business types. In this sample company file, what we have for classes are new construction, remodel, or overhead. As you can see, I'm working in Rock Castle Construction, and it is a construction company. So what this company wants to do is they want to look at their income and expenses based on their new construction jobs or remodeling jobs. And when you're in your reports, I'm just going to run a profit and loss by class. Oh, and that's a generic report in QuickBooks. And as you can see, it gives you my income and expenses by class. And anything that's not classified will show up in an unclassified column. And then the totals. So that's how you would turn on classes in QuickBooks. Again, we have some warnings that you can set to automatically assign, or warn when posting to retained earnings, which is a good one to have on. And then you can set QuickBooks to automatically assign a general journal entry. So if you've got your general journal entry starting at 1, it'll automatically assign the next one to 2, 3, 4, etc. Then there's some date warnings. If you want to warn yourself or warn the users if they're going to date something, either 90 days in the past or 30 days in the future, QuickBooks will give a pop-up that, do you know what date you're posting in? Is that correct? And then a very important one is to set the date and password. So if you are doing your tax return and you've gotten all the changes back from your accountant at the end of the year, it's a good idea to set a closing date and password so that nothing gets changed after that. And to set this user date or closing date, You just put in the date, and if you want, you can set a password. Setting passwords are optional, but if you're in a multi-user environment, I would definitely suggest you set the admin set a closing date. And also, if you're using estimates, sales orders, or purchase orders, you might want to exclude those from the closing date, because otherwise, if you've got an estimate that's dated in a prior year and you need to go back and look at it or make changes, if that is included, QuickBooks then will not let you change those. So that's why you want to exclude those. So those are my preferences for accounting. Preferences for bill
Join the meeting.
are nothing for my preferences. So the bill preferences can only be changed by the admin. This is just kind of generic. Bills are normally due 10 days after receipt, and that you can change that per vendor. Warning about duplicate bill numbers for the same vendor. That's a good one to have turned on. If you get a lot of bills from the same vendor, if you accidentally put one in twice, it'll give you a warning. Then you have an option to automatically use the credits that are on that vendor or automatically use discounts, and then to sign the discount account. So when you're paying your bills, let me turn those on actually. Okay, they're both on. So in my pay bills, here I have a Hobson Construction Rentals. My discount date is 12/15/24. So by having those turned on, let's see here. Yeah, there we go. What QuickBooks will do is it'll automatically calculate what the discount is and figure out the amount to pay. You can see my amounts change automatically. I don't have to go down to the set discount. And the same thing will happen with the credits. I've got a credit out there for Cal Gas and Electric, and you can see it's automatically taking that for me based on the amount due and then the amount to pay. If you don't want to have those turned on, say you get a lot of different credits from your vendor and you want to manually apply those to specific invoices, then that's an instance where you would want that to be turned off. And that's where you can set that up, is in the bill preferences under company preferences. Calendar. The calendar is specific to the user. There's no company preferences. And you can have different views, a weekly view, and different showing of transactions. Again, these are something you can change all on the calendar, but here are things that you can set preferences for also. Setting upcoming and past due settings. Here's where you can show what's displaying, how many days before, and how many days after. So if I look at my calendar, here's where I can set things in QuickBooks to show on the calendar. And you've got your preferences, but you can also change them on the top. And everything in the preferences is here. So if I want to see only my to-dos, I can change that. If I want to do it by a specific day, week, or month, I can show those. So if I look at my to-do for December 18th, I've got an annual review. And I can add a to-do right on this window. So I can have a reminder anytime I want within the calendar. So that's my calendar preferences. Checking, this just gives you a default account when you are in write checks, pay bills, pay sales tax, or making deposits. So if you've got several different checking accounts, here's where you might want to set your defaults. And then in company preferences, here are some new ones that only the admin can change. Printing the account names on the voucher. So when you're printing a check off of QuickBooks, if it's for advertising expense will print on the voucher. Changing the check date, starting with the payee field on the check, warning about duplicate check numbers, autofilling a payee account number in the check memo. And what that is if you have in your vendors, if you have a account number set up right here, that account number will show on the memo of the check. So if I go put in an account number, when I print that check, oh, wrong vendor. Oh, pick the right. Okay. I think I did any city. Nope. Which vendor did I just? I thought I did. Okay, here. Did I not save it? That would help if I saved it. Okay, click OK. So now, okay, so for some reason it's not showing up here, and I'm wondering if it's because this is a check, and it will only do it for pay bills. I'm just going to test this out because it didn't do this for me yesterday. Okay, so now if I go into pay bills, and I'm not sure why it's not cooperating. Thank you for being patient with me. Okay, so for some reason it's not printing on here. Okay, let's take a look at this again because it should. In my vendors, try this one. Account number. Okay, let's do a new check. Wonder if it's because there's something out there. Let's see if that makes a difference. Because there's an existing PO and it's still not putting it in. Okay, I will get past this and go on to the next one and see if I can figure this out at the end because I don't want to waste your time. So let's see. Open the Create Paychecks if you've got a different checking account for your payroll. You can also use that checking account and set it as a default. For bank feeds, if you are using bank feeds within QuickBooks, here's where you can change the view of the bank feeds. And here's where you can tell QuickBooks if you want to create rules automatically or not, and asking before creating a rule. So if you are using bank feeds, here's where you can change any of those preferences. In the desktop view, you can view one window or multiple windows. I myself like multiple windows, but if you like the one window view, it'll give you just the one window, one big window. And I tend to have a lot of windows open at one time, so that's why I like my multiple windows. You can toggle if you do have one window open. If you do have it set on one window, you can still toggle between windows by choosing the open window on the left menu bar. And I'm going to go back to multiple. And desktop, save when closing your company. Don't save the desktop or save current desktop. So saving the current and saving when closing is pretty close to the same. So if you've got a bunch of windows open and you're going to exit QuickBooks, but you want to, when you come back in the next day, you want everything to be there yet. So I've got 30 windows open. When I open QuickBooks the next day, I'm going to have 30 windows open. You can switch to colored icons and lights on the top menu bar. You can do different display options based on your Windows settings, different sounds if you are using if you've got your sound on. Show the home page when opening a company file. Switching, okay, I went through that already, but the fun thing is you can change your color scheme. So if I don't like this blue-gray color, I can change it to, say, red. Or I can change it to pink or forest green. So if you have multiple company files in QuickBooks, you can have a different color for each company. That way you don't get confused as to which company you're in. You'll be able to tell by the color scheme. Under the company preferences, this is where you can turn on and off the different icons on your home screen. So I'm using I'm using the accountant's version of QuickBooks, but if you have one of the premier versions, you would be able to turn on and off these items. So I'm not using sales receipts. I can turn that on, and what it'll do is it'll turn off my sales receipts. It'll take this icon off of my QuickBooks desktop. So if you're not using these, and with the sales orders, again, that's only with the premier version of QuickBooks. That's where you can say, okay, maybe I'm not using those. So and you can actually just go click on these and turn it on and off from here, or in the inventory module preferences right here, you can turn on and off the inventory right there. So there's a few things that, if you want to take those off of your desktop, let's say I don't do time tracking, it'll take me right to that time tracking option. So I'm going to say no, and it'll take this enter time off of my home screen. Then I'm going to look at my finance charges. There's nothing that you can do under my preferences, but under the company preferences is where you're going to set up your interest rate, if there's a minimum finance charge, if you give a grace period, your finance charge account, assessing finance charges on overdue finance charges. You need to check with your state whether this is legal or not, and then calculate your charges from the due date or the bill date. And if you're going to do statements, you want to mark all finance charges to be printed. So here are the defaults for finance charges. Again, you can change those defaults when you are in your statements. Assessing finance charges, you can get to the settings, and it brings you to the exact window we were just on. your general preferences. This is one of my main ones that I go to. If you like to press enter to move between your fields, here's where you can turn that on. If you don't turn this on, QuickBooks is going to want you to hit the tab key when you're moving between fields. So here's where you can turn that on and off. Automatically opening the drop-down list when you're typing. So with that one turned on, if I am here and I go to, oops, I don't want items, I want expenses, it will automatically bring up my lists that have anything to do with payroll. Beep when recording a transaction. I always turn this off. A lot of people like this. One of my clients said, I like it when it beeps because that means I got something done. So if you enjoy the beeping, go ahead and turn that on. Automatically placing your decimal point. If you just like to type the numbers and don't want to type the decimal, here's where you can turn that on. If you're going to edit a transaction, QuickBooks will warn you, are you sure you want to do that? And then you can say yes, and it'll automatically record it then after you tell QuickBooks yes. If you don't want it to warn you, that's where you can turn the warning off. Bring back all one-time messages. Now, have you ever in QuickBooks gone to close a window and accidentally closed QuickBooks? A lot of people do that. I'm one of them. But if you're going to close a window and you want QuickBooks to say, wait a minute, are you sure you want to leave QuickBooks? That's a preference you want to turn on. So if I am going in my preferences and bringing back all my one-time messages, what I'm going to do then is if I click the X, it's going to say, are you sure you want to exit? Here's where I can say, do not display. So I'm going to say, no, I don't want to exit. But that's where you can turn on the preference if you accidentally are clicking on the wrong X. That's the preference to turn on. And again, that's under General, bring back all one-time messages. Turn off the pop-up messages for products and services. So if you're getting pop-ups while you're in QuickBooks for different products and services that are available, here's where you can turn that off. And then showing tooltips for the text and warning when deleting a transaction or deleting an unused list item. So you can have the system warn you. You can have QuickBooks automatically recall information and have it pre-fill accounts for the vendor or automatically recall the last transaction for that vendor. I don't like to automatically recall the last transaction because it will automatically recall the dollar amount also. I just like it to pre-fill. So what that does, if you are in your write checks and you bring up the vendor, it will automatically put in the account that the last transaction got coded to. So it's kind of a little shortcut. If your vendors if you use the same accounts for the vendor time and time again, that's where you can set that up to have it automatically do it. Default date to use for new transactions if you want to use today's date or the last entered date. So if I've got this one turned on and I used the last date was, say, 5/10, when I go to do a new transaction, 5/10 will show up instead of today's date. And then for your items, keeping the information when changing an item in transaction. So whenever you're in a transaction, if you see, do you want to change this, everything going forward? Do you want to make this for the item automatically change? I always ask just because you have to keep in mind that it's going to change everything all the time. So backwards, forwards for that item, it will change that. So you want to have it ask. Okay, and then the company preferences, here's where you can show your hours as a decimal or minutes. If you're using payroll, this is where you're going to change that. If you want the year to show up as 4 digits all the time, here's where you can turn that on. Here's where you can say never update name information when saving transactions. So if you are doing an invoice to a customer and you're putting in a new address for that customer, if you have this turned on, it's not going to update that going forward. So if I've got that turned off, then QuickBooks will say, do you want to add that to the permanent record? So by turning this off, what happens is I do an invoice and say I change my bill to, hang on a second, it's asking me a couple questions on my other screen. Okay, so say I want to change my address. Let's say Robert Allard moved to 123 Main Street. When I save the invoice, I'm going to make a fake invoice up here. When I save it, it will ask me, I've changed the billing address. Do I want to have that changed in the past and current and future transactions? So what it'll do is it'll change his permanent record in the customer file. So now if I look at customers, if I look at Allard for the job remodel, now it's at Main Street. Again, this is job and customer specific, so keep that in mind also. Let's see. Having the system force you to save the transaction before printing, that's a good one to have turned on. Otherwise, sometimes what happens is if you have that turned off and you are, say, writing checks or something like that and you don't save the transaction, then all of a sudden when you're doing your bank rec, you've got things on your bank reconciliation that aren't in QuickBooks because you didn't have the system warn you. So that's one I like to keep on. Login settings, if you're in a multi-user environment, this one's one you want to use to keep the user logged in for, because it can automatically log off your user then. Okay, integrated transaction or applications, there's nothing for my preferences. And here is where if you have other programs that interface with QuickBooks, here's where you can set those programs up. And when you're setting the program up or the app up to interface, this is where you're going to go and you're going to allow that application to access your QuickBooks file. And you can choose not to allow the application and to notify the user before running the application if the application certificate has expired. You've got your different properties, and those properties are to allow read and modify the company file automatically or prompting, and allow access to Social Security numbers, credit card information. Probably don't want to allow that unless it's maybe a CRM interface or something like that. And then just details of that third-party application. Or maybe you're not using that application anymore. You can also remove it from this window. Okay, inventory. Here is where you turn on your inventory if you are using inventory. So I'm going to say, yes, I want to use inventory and purchase orders. And what that does is it puts my purchase orders and receive inventory on my home screen. Again, warning about duplicates. And when calculating quantities available, if you want to deduct anything on pending bills or anything on sales orders, here's where you can turn that on or off. So in the Premier Edition of QuickBooks, you can do inventory builds. And if you're doing those bills, you probably want QuickBooks to take those out of inventory once it is reserved for a build. Because otherwise somebody else could grab that from inventory, and then when you go to complete your build, it's not going to be there. You can have the system warn if there's not enough inventory to sell. When the quantity exceeds the quantity on hand, or when the quantity exceeds the quantity available. So again, that has to do with your pending and sales orders. Because I have the Premier version of QuickBooks, I also have unit of measure, and here's where I can turn on the different preferences, the different options for that. And if you have QuickBooks Enterprise Solutions, there are some advanced inventory settings. We're going to look at jobs and estimates. There are only company available for this. And here, if you're using jobs or your estimates, you can change the job status. So what this job status is, or your estimate status, is when you're in a customer. If you set up a job for that customer, you also have your job information. So here's my job description, my job type, and my job status. These statuses are what you can change the names of. So when I'm in my preferences, here's where I change those names. It asks you if you create estimates or not. Here's where you can say yes or no. And again, that'll change the icon on the home screen. Let me pop out of here, get back to the home screen. So that's where it'll turn on and off the estimate preference. If you do progress invoicing, turning it on or off here. If you don't want the system to print items that have a zero amount, you can turn that on, or warning about duplicate estimate numbers. Multiple currencies. If you do use multiple currencies, here's where you turn it on. In all of my years with QuickBooks, I've only had one client that uses multiple currency. And once you turn this on, you cannot turn it off. If you do use more than one currency, what QuickBooks will do is it will give you a screen within the currency to put in the exchange rate for, say, Germany's dollar to our dollar. So that's where you can do that. Payments. You don't have any preferences for yourself, but the admin can change the company to automatically apply payments, automatically calculate the payments, and use undeposited funds as your default account. So what this does is when a customer is making their payments, let's see. Okay, so he's got invoices out there. So if I have it turned on to automatically apply, and he's paid, say, $500, what QuickBooks is going to do is it's going to apply it to the oldest invoice first before it applies it to the newer invoice. But it will automatically apply that. And if you don't want it to do it, you can unclick it and apply it to the correct invoice, and then do the balance to the older one. So that's kind of up to you if you want to turn that on or off. automatically calculating the payments, what that will do is the payment amount, let's say I don't have that in. What if I just click in here, it'll click on the invoice on the left-hand side, it'll automatically fill that in as the amount due. You can see my payment amount is changing accordingly by clicking the invoices. So that's where you can make those changes. If maybe you have a lot of different invoices for the customer and you want to apply them on your own, here's where you would turn that off. And again, this is just the default, so you can always change that when you're in the actual receive payments window. You can have online payments if you're signed up for that with QuickBooks. If you will only allow your customers to do a credit card, or if you will also allow them to do an ACH. And you can do both also. And I don't have it set up with this company file, but just so you know, that's out there. Payment reminders. If you want to send payment reminders, yes or no. And if the QuickBooks is open, it can prompt you to send those out and how often you want to send those out. And what payment reminders are is if you are in customers, you have a payment reminder window. And if you have this set up, you can manage your customer groups. So you can have different groups of customers. And then from there, you can set up payment reminders as a schedule. And then you can review and send those, because it's kind of like doing your statements, but all at once. So that is your payments. Payroll and employees, this is again where you're going to turn your payroll on or off. If you're doing after the fact payroll, you can enter that in QuickBooks by choosing no payroll or manual payroll. Okay, so if you're also doing online payroll, that's another feature that you're paying extra for. Preferences for. This is one thing I like to change when I am setting up payroll. Paystub and voucher printing. So what this is it tells you what's going to print on that pay stub or voucher. If you want the employee's address, company address, the pay period. If you want to change the vacation, say you don't really track vacation, but maybe you track PTO. And instead of vacation, you just want it to say PTO, here's where you can change that on the check stub. And if you don't use sick pay, you can turn that on or off. And again, you can print it as sick pay or change the name. If you want your company name, your federal ID number, different things to have print on the check stub. Only the last 4 digits or the employee social security number, I suggest you don't click those, either one of those. If you want to print hours for salaried employees, you can have that checked. But this one I always change is the standard font size to the large font size. It's just a lot easier to read. And I always will uncheck print Intuit logo. You don't need Intuit's logo on the bottom of your checks. If you are having QuickBooks track your workers' compensation, accrue your workers' compensation, here's where you would set that up. And you want to be careful how you set it up, and you want to also take a look at it after you've done a couple transactions with it. Because if you set it up incorrectly, it can really mess up your financial statements. And again, your sick and vacation time, this is your defaults. So if at the beginning of the year, each employee gets 40 hours of vacation, anytime you set up a new employee, this is what's going to show for the hours for vacation time. Or if you're accruing it, a maximum hours or maximum hours for the year. And if you have a use it or lose it policy, if you want to reset the hours each year. If you want to copy the earnings detail from a previous paycheck, maybe somebody gets paid 40 hours every week. You can copy that. Recall the quantity field, same difference. They get paid 40 hours every week, that'll show up. Recall the hour field, same thing. Actually, quantity is a different area of the paycheck. I'll look at that in a second with you. Job costing, class, and item tracking per paycheck expenses. So if you are using job costing or classes or items or class and item tracking on the paychecks, here is where you're going to want to turn that on. And if you want it to assign one class per entire paycheck or earnings item, here's where you can differentiate those. If you want to have your employee list by first name or last name, if you have sales reps, if you want to mark those as new employees as sales reps, and if you want to display the employee Social Security number on reports. I never have that one turned on. And again, your employee defaults, these will default when you're setting up your employees. If all your employees are biweekly pay schedule and you've got a class, you probably want to leave the class blank, but you want to set up probably a regular pay. If you're going to use time data to create the paychecks, so if you're using the enter time in QuickBooks, you can have that automatically pop into your paychecks. So here's where you're going to add anything different. Say you have health insurance. Maybe every employee takes your health insurance. But this is just, again, the defaults. You can change this per employee. Here's where you can set up default taxes, which I would suggest you do. So what I suggest you do is go into the state and change your state worked and state subject to withholding to the state that you are in. Because if you don't set these up here, you have to remember to set them up when you're doing the company or the employee setup. And if you forget, it's not going to take the withholding properly. And again, your sick and vacation defaults. We looked at that again with the preferences over here on the window. So if we look at our employees, it's going to go to pay employees. And I am going to do a scheduled payroll. And I'm going to look at their paychecks. So I'm going to go into the detail. So here is where I can tell QuickBooks, let's see, where's my classes? Oh, here's my class. So I have it going to one class. I want to change that. Let's see, to earnings item. So what it'll do is it'll give me another area to put in the class. You can see it's got a workers' comp code, depending on what that employee is doing. You can change that if they're working on a specific customer or job, and if they're doing new construction or remodel. So let's say Dan Miller's the boss, but here's Elizabeth Mason. She's out doing some work for Christy. and she's going to be doing some roofing. And Christy is a remodel customer. And then if I did overtime on that job, or maybe you've got regular pay for a different job, and put in the hours, say she worked 2 hours doing carpentry, or the same job or a different job, it's up to you. So here's where QuickBooks will job cost for you. It'll job cost your workers' comp expenses. It will job cost and calculate or allocate based on hours, and it'll allocate your employer portion of the payroll taxes. So in Wisconsin, it will job cost your Social Security, your Medicare, your federal, and your state unemployment, which is really cool. I have a builder that does that, and it's just amazing what, just the amount of job costing that can come out of it and how accurate it is. And maybe you're not tracking it by customer job. Maybe you're only doing it by class. That's fine too. Again, you can just change your preferences to do it by maybe entire paycheck or just your earnings items. So here's where you're going to turn that on and off. And again, you're sorting the list. I like my employee list by last name. And some of these windows, when you do change a preference, it makes you close out of all the windows. Here. Back to my home page. And now if I look at my employees list, it will now show up in alphabetical order. So that's where you can change that. Reminders. My preferences are to show the reminder list when opening your company file. So if I close out of QuickBooks, the next time I go back in it, it's going to pop up my reminder list. You can also find the reminder list under your company on the top menu bar. Then you've got the company preferences. So if you don't want to see the preferences when you open your company file, you can turn it off. But if you do see the preferences, here's the ones that the admin can set for you. So checks to print, if you want the system to remind you 5 days before the check date. If you want it to show a list versus a summary, or maybe you don't even want that on your reminders, you can say, don't remind me. Different reminders that you can have, paychecks to print, invoices, et cetera, et cetera. So here's where you can turn on your reminders for your reminder window. Take a look at that window. And here's my reminders. So here's my to-do notes. I have 3 of them it's showing me. I just have to click on the arrow to get the detail. And again, if you tell it to show you the detail, it'll do that without clicking on the arrow for your reminders. I want it to show the list. Right now, it's only showing me summaries. And again, if you're in your reminder window, you have the gear icon. That'll get you right into the same area. If I want to add a reminder, I can add that right from this window. If it's a task, a call, meeting, you can add that right through the window. Reports. If you are modifying, if you have a large company file, what you might want to do is prompt the system to remind you to modify the report before you're printing or before you open the report. If your company file is large and you don't have this checked, what's going to happen is when you run a report, it's going to take like a long time to run to get that report up, and then you've got to modify it for a date or something like that. Then you have to wait for it to run again. So if you have this turned on, prompt you to modify before opening the report. What that does is, if you're looking at your customers and receivables, maybe your AR summary report, before it even opens the report, it gives you your modification window. So I can change my date range, things like that right here, and then I don't have to wait for it to refresh twice. It's just a way to get into things a little bit quicker if you have a large company file. If you are using graphs in QuickBooks or reports in QuickBooks, if you go back and make a change, if you want QuickBooks to refresh that report automatically, prompt you to refresh or don't refresh. So let's say I'm going to have it prompt me. So when I run into my AR report, I'm going to go this fiscal year. And let's just say I make a change to this invoice. Say, I don't recommend changing invoices, but just for this, I'm just going to do this for the example. When I save it, it's going to say, you've changed the transaction. Do you want to record it, yes or no? So then, because I changed it, it's going to say, your report needs to be refreshed. Because I made that change, so I'm going to say, yes, refresh the report, and then it will refresh it from here. So that's just a warning it'll give you. When I make changes, I don't like it to ask me because it gets old and tedious. So I normally have refresh automatically on. That's just my preference. Or not to refresh the report at all. So if you make a change and you've got the report up, it's not going to refresh it. If you have a large company file and you use your graphs, you can have the graphs print in 2D or use patterns. What the 2D will do is it will do the graphs a little bit faster. And also with using patterns, then you don't have your colors. Maybe you just have a black and white printer. Here's where you might want to use the patterns. And I'll show you the differences there. Let me do that and go into a graph. So this is what it looks like in 2D and with my patterns. It's not as pretty as your regular 3D graph. Which is the colorful one, and it has the shadows. You can see the shadows behind it. That's the difference between 2D and 3D. But it's much prettier to look at. Your company preferences, again, these are set by the admin. If you want to show your reports on an accrual or cash basis, this will prompt all of your reports to be accrual or all of your reports to be cash. You can change those when the reports are generated. Aging reports, either from the due date or from the transaction date. Reports show items by name, description, or name and description. So what that is when you're in your item list, let's bring up an item. So here's my item name, and then here's my item description. So if you want both of them to show up on your reports, or just one of them to show up on your reports, that's where you would change that. And again, my name and my description, depending on how you've got your items set up. Your reports, you can have your report show by name, description, or name and description. So if you're looking at your chart of accounts or you're printing your financial statements, when you're printing your financial statements, I'm going to edit that account. Here's my account name, and here's my account description. So if I just want the account name or just the description to show up, that's where I can change it. So maybe you've got a different description and that's what you want on the financial statements. Then you can have it print by description only. So that's where you would change that preference. And if you're using the statement of cash flows, here is where you can classify your cash flows. So if maybe you've added some new accounts and your cash flow statement isn't right, you might need to come in and tell QuickBooks which column that should go to. Cancel out of there. And default formatting for reports. This is a nice one to change. So if I want to format my reports, this is one that I often change because my reports, when I print them, maybe I want my fonts to be different. Because when I'm doing a report in QuickBooks, or say I'm doing an invoice, my report data normally prints at a font of 8. That's kind of small. I don't like getting my glasses out. So if I change that to 10, that means all of my reports now will print in a font of 10. You can change the fonts for your labels, column labels, row labels, all these different items you can change the fonts for. Say my page number, I want to be a different font. Maybe I want that to be bold italic and a different font. So I can change that. But that changed all related fonts, so I don't want it to do that. So I'm going to go back to my data, leave it where it was, and I wanted it at 10, regular, and let's just say Arial, okay? So I'm going to say yes, change it all, but then for, say, my report title, I want that different. When it says change all related fonts, I say no. So then it will just change that font. Show your negative numbers. Maybe you want it with a minus. Maybe you want it in parentheses with trailing minuses in bright red. Just different ways to show your negative balances. And show all numbers divided by 1,000. Maybe you don't want it to show 0 amounts. And without cents. Here's where you can change those. A lot of different changes you can make with your reports. With your header and footer in the reports, again, you can change these per report, but you can also change a default. So depending how your alignment's going to go, left, right, you can see how it's changing on the page or centered. If you want to print the footer line, if you want to print the footer on the first page, just your different options for your reports. And again, you can change those when you're actually in the reports by choosing the header footer. That's the exact same window. And here again is your fonts. You can change that by report by just clicking on the Customize button. And then you've got your different options. So that's my reporting, sales and customers. Again, this is for job costing. If you want to add the time and cost to the invoices, you can have the system ask what to do, don't add any, or prompt what you want to add. The company preferences for your sales and customers is if you're doing shipping, your usual method. And again, when you're doing an invoice or a form, you can always change that, but this is your usual method. If you have a usual FOB, warn about duplicate invoice numbers. Here's where you can turn your sales orders on and off if you have the Premier version of QuickBooks. Here's where you've got your different templates for a packing slip. And again, you can customize your forms also in QuickBooks. Collection Center, if you want to enable the Collection Center, I'll show you that in a minute. I don't see a really big point of it. If you have price levels, here's where you can enable the pricing levels. And again, here's some templates if you always want that template to come up. And again, if you are doing a template for your invoice, you can always change it right in the form. We'll take a little peek at that. So here's my template. Say this is a packing slip. I'm going to change the template right here. So there's a bunch of pre-formatted ones that come with QuickBooks. If you want to edit your templates or do something different with them, you can go into formatting and customize them. Or another way to get them is go into lists, and here's your template list. So these are all the different templates that are set up in QuickBooks. So that's your templates. If you have custom report or the price levels set up, what that will allow you to do, it's asking me if I want to do job costing, is based on the job or the item, you have different rates. You can set up your different price levels for your customers. And that would be in my price level list. And again, I believe this is only for the Premier Edition. So that's available. You can set that also per customer. In your payment settings, here's your price levels. Just so you know, that's available if you have the Premier Edition of QuickBooks. So then we'll go on to sales tax. There are no my preferences, it's only company. Here's where you tell QuickBooks if you're charging sales tax or not. Yes or no? I'm going to say yes. Your most used sales tax item, the most common one, you can set up here, and that way when you're setting up a new customer, this is the one that's going to default. You can always change it per customer. So your sales tax items and sales tax groupings are in your item list. That's where you would set those up. And how the determining if they're taxable and non-taxable. If it's taxable, you want tax, and then non-taxable, and that's where you set those up in your items. And if you want them to show on your invoices as a T for taxable, you can check that on. When do you owe sales tax, as of invoice date or as of cash basis, receipt of payment? I know in Wisconsin, it is always as of invoice date, the accrual basis, unless you have a special waiver from the state of Wisconsin. So make sure that's set properly. When do you owe sales tax, monthly, quarterly, or annually? So that way when you're running reports for your sales tax, QuickBooks is going to default to whichever one you've checked here. And let's just look at the items so you can see where the sales tax codes come in. So if I'm setting up a new item, here's where my sales tax codes are. The search, if you've got different searching that you want to do, I think it comes with automatically do the search box preferences. I really don't. It's when QuickBooks changes like their help menus, things like that. Or maybe if you change a transaction, and maybe you're searching for the dollar amount that you changed it to, but it didn't update yet. Here's where you can change that. Sending forms. If you are emailing forms to customers, vendors, you can have the system auto check email later. So when you're in that form, QuickBooks is automatically going to say email later if that's the customer preferred delivery method. So when you're looking at the customer list, if you have the customer, let's see, preferred payment method in your payment settings as email, that's the payment method, delivery method is above that, email. What QuickBooks is going to do is it's going to put that in a queue to print later if you have this checked. Your email, here's where you can set the preference for that. If you want to use plain text format for emailed invoices. And then in the company preferences, again, here's the default, and you can change that per customer. You can do email templates for different things. So I'm looking at the invoice template right now, which is my current default. If I have, say, my statements, I can change my template here. Let's say I'm going to add a template, and we'll do basic 1. We'll save it. So you can set this one as default if you'd like. So that's where you would show, which statement or form you're going to use for emailing. Service connection. This is if you're using Web Connect. So if you're using Web Connect, here is where you would turn on giving the option of saving and automatically connecting or asking for the password before connecting or allowing background downloading of messages. Spelling. There are no companies. These are all your preferences. So ignore words with. If you don't want it to spell check, you can uncheck it. So different things you want to do there. You can custom add words if you'd like. Tax and 1099s, this is where you tell the system if you file 1099s. If this is checked to no, you won't have the option in any of the reporting, anything like that for 1099s. And this is also where you can do your mapping. So you can map here, or you could do it through the vendor's menu. So if I want to do it here, I'm not going to back up, but that's where I can do my mapping and things like that for your 1099s. So it's got the 2 different forms, the NEC and the 1099 MISC. And tax and expenses. There's no my preferences, but in the company, it says do track time. And what this does is it will turn on the time tracking on your home screen. Enter time right here. You can either do it by a weekly timesheet or a single activity. So that's where you're going to tell it if you're tracking time or not. And then the first day of the work week, if you're using a timesheet, this will be the first date that shows up on the timesheet. If you're doing job costing and you want to mark your time as billable, here's where you're going to turn that on and off. You can also do it in the timesheet or in the invoicing. If you want to create the invoice from a list of time and expenses, it'll automatically do that for you. If you want to be able to pick, you want to change that to turned off. Tracked reimbursed expenses as income. Mark all expenses as billable. If there's a default markup that you want to use, you can do that. and your default markup account. So that's all the preferences available in QuickBooks. Again, a lot of these you can change just on the window of the form you're on. A lot of them you can't. You actually need to go into your preference window. So on that note, let's see. I'm looking at my questions right now, and that were turned in. So using classifications for a nonprofit, I went through turning that on and off, which is in your accounting preferences. And that is using classes. Let's see. I got another one for your reminders. A question if the pending invoices can be turned on in the reminders window. And that it cannot do, but you could put in a to-do note for a pending invoice, and in that case, it would show up in your to-do notes. Let's see. See if I have any other questions. I've got some questions in the chat window. Okay, so Minnesota can do cash or accrual. Thank you, Jennifer, for letting me know that. I know Wisconsin is only accrual. Find my other questions. Okay. And that looks like all the questions that came in through the chat. What I'm going to do now is actually go through some of the other questions that were asked. Customizing the desktop for what you want to see. Again, we kind of looked at that under the preferences. And for what you want to see, that's again in the company preferences, but here's where you can turn on and off certain things. Say, I don't want to see my estimates. I'm going to say no, okay. And then it's going to turn the estimates off on my home window. No more estimates. So that's where you can turn that on and off. How to populate portions of a company snapshot on the home page. So if I'm using my company snapshots, see here. In order to change what you see here, you can customize it under how do I customize this page. That gives you helpful hints on how to customize it, but you can also do it by adding content. Click on the down arrow, and here's where you can show different things to be added. You can delete different content. You can do all kinds of things with your company snapshot. If you don't like the way it's turned out, you want to start over, you can restore your default. Again, with payments, you can add content, and customers, you can add content. So that's where you would add those items. You can change things. Say I didn't want the sales history. I can X out of that. In this form, once I X out of it here, it's going to take it out of my customer snapshot. As you can see, it's giving me a reminder. It's asking me, do I really want to do this? So that's where you can add and change things in the snapshots. The customizing logo and invoice wording. That is where, when you're customizing your reports, let's just go into an invoice. if I'm formatting an invoice, you're going to customize your data layout under the Formatting tab, and that's going to take you to a new window, which is going to give me additional customization. Let me drag that over here. And here's where you can change the invoice, which is on the top right of your window. If you want it to say invoice, maybe you want it all caps, maybe you want it to show a different wording, your date, all your different headers. If you want it to show on the screen but don't want it to print, you can uncheck the print button. So I unchecked the one for invoice, and now it doesn't say invoice on my invoice anymore. So that's where you can turn things on and off. For your headers, you can set up different columns depending on what information you want it to show. Say I'm not using unit of measure, so I can turn that off on the screen and in the print. And now it will take out that column for unit of measure. If you are using other, if you are customizing in your customers or vendors, here's where you can add other 1 and 2. If you're using progress invoicing, here's where you can change that what's going to show on the screen. You can add different footers. If you've got say a long disclaimer that you want to show on each and every invoice, you can change that here. And then if you wanted to go to maybe a specific printer, you can also have it change to page numbers, printing on each screen, each page. Your layout designer in the customization will let you move things around. So if I want my invoice, maybe I want it to show up down here, I can just click and drag it. Maybe I want my columns bigger, I can drag them. So there's a lot of different things you can do with customizing your forms. Let's see. And if you wanted to add a logo to your form, you would do that in the customization. Let's see. In the base, you want to click on the basic customization then. So when I'm in my formatting, you click on basic customization, it will bring you to a different window. And here's where you can use your logo. And QuickBooks will ask you where that logo is stored. So once this is checked, you can select it and find where that is in your QuickBooks. And again, if you're using different forms, maybe you've got an estimate, an invoice, packing slip, you're going to want to customize that data layout in each of those forms. Let's see. Then I have another question, adding budgets to financial statements. And what you want to do there for budgeting, that's under the company menu and planning and budgeting. And here's where you can set up your budgets under the company menu. And then under your reports, there's a separate area for budget and forecast reports. So you can do a budget versus actual report. And then it will give you a window, which year do you want to do it in? If you want to account by month, if you're tracking it by classes, you can do it by class also. You can change your date range by customizing, and here it will give you the different things for your report, for your budget versus actual. So I think I've gotten through some of the simpler questions that came in with the registrations. If I didn't get to your question, that means it's pretty much specific, or it's just something that it would take too long to explain. So if you have questions that I didn't get to, I will show you my direct line. My phone number is 920-337-4558. My email is ddenny@hawkinsashcpas.com. So this is where you can get a hold of me if I didn't get to your questions, or if you have questions that you think of down the line. That is my contact information. So I want to thank you all for joining our webinar today. And if you have questions in the future, or maybe have suggestions of webinars that you would like to see in the future, please feel free to let us know, because we do pay attention to those. So have a great afternoon and try to stay cool. Thanks. Bye-bye.